Hello everyone and welcome to another tactical analysis video. Now I know this one was kind of requested a fair bit, and to be fair it's El Clasico, so it was always going to be requested a fair bit. So without further ado, let's get the ball rolling. Real Madrid started off playing an extremely high pressure game, somewhat reminiscent of what we're ironically used to seeing more from Barcelona in recent history. Despite the tactical reasons behind this, one could also argue that it made sense, given that in context of La Liga at the moment, this was a must-win game for Los Blancos, and an early goal would certainly help them. Real Madrid playing with their usual 4-1-3-2 or 4-4-2 diamond, which really changes based on the off-the-ball movement of players, where both Ronaldo and Benzema drop deep. That often helps them pack the midfield anyway, and also makes space for players like Toni Kroos and Modric to bomb forward into. Knowing that Barcelona were going to be relying on only a flat four in midfield, and the 4-4-2 is something that Valverde has utilised all season with Barcelona to provide Messi and Suarez with direct service, being the flat four in midfield for Barcelona, it was their job to provide Messi and Suarez with that direct service. Real Madrid wanted to seize on a numerical advantage in the middle of the park. This is why one could argue that it made sense for Zidane to start with Kovacic instead of Gareth Bale. Due to the high pressure game that Real Madrid were playing, fluidity and positional awareness was going to be important, given that it meant wing-backs would also pressure centrally and obviously leave gaps behind them. Casemiro was given more freedom to push forward and use his defensive capabilities further up the pitch where he feels required, but when this happens, it was also important that as a result of Casemiro perhaps bombing forward, Kovacic or Modric would be aware of that and always look to cover in order to protect both Ramos and Varane and so on. Real Madrid not only pressured using their numerical advantage in central areas, but both Carvajal and Marcelo were often applying pressure onto their opposite wing-backs, finding themselves further up the pitch sometimes than even the likes of Kroos and Modric. This also emphasises why it was important that the communication between the more defensive-orientated midfielders in Casemiro and Kovacic was there to cover for the space that was always going to be left behind with the wing-backs. With the wing-backs pushed up, it was crucial, up against two strikers in the form of Messi and Suarez, that Madrid also maintained a numerical advantage in this area too, to prevent counter-attacks and protect Ramos and Varane. The wing-backs playing high up the pitch, partnered with an emphasis on a lot of central high pressure, also meant that when Real Madrid won the ball back, they always had a quick wide passing option to transition as quickly as possible from defence to attack. And given the narrow formation that they were playing and the fact that they had an extra central midfielder on, this made sense. Real Madrid knew that due to Barca's narrow four in midfield, which really mainly consists of central and creative players, than a more traditional approach which you get with a 4-4-2 with at least two direct wingers with pace, where the aim is to really counter-attack and play a crossing game into the two strikers. They knew that by pressuring Barca high up the park and maintaining at least an extra man in midfield at all times, and sometimes this would become two extra men in midfield, given how deep Benzema in particular likes to drop, the Barca midfield would get choked, and opportunities to supply both Messi and Suarez would become scarce, because Barca would struggle to get their wing-backs involved, who they rely on for width because of the amount of pressure coming in onto their wing-backs from Marcelo and Carvajal, and because all the central players are being flooded and playing incredibly narrow, well, it would always be difficult for them to maybe try and thread the ball through to Messi or Suarez, because wherever Barcelona look, it always seems like they're outnumbered on the pitch. From Ter Stegen's goal kicks as well, Madrid also pushed an extra midfielder up. Sometimes that would be Kroos, sometimes that would be Modric, to join Ronaldo and Benzema in marking the Barca players to force Ter Stegen basically to not be able to pass the ball out the back, which is what Barcelona like to do in their build-up, but rather hit the ball long towards the big boys in the form of Varane, Ramos and Casemiro to win the ball back. Real Madrid's attacks were typical of what we've become accustomed to see. under Zinedine Zidane's management of Real Madrid. Lots of utilisation of width given Barcelona's willingness to sit narrow, apply pressure very conservatively and concede the ball in wide areas. This obviously meant we also saw lots of switch in play from the playmakers to the wing-backs to try and find space behind Alba and Roberto, and upon receiving the ball in wide areas, this would be the trigger for central midfielders, more than likely in the form of Modric and Kroos, to also make runs forward into space and instigate 1-2 passes with the wing-backs to help Real move up the pitch and make life tough for Sergi Roberto and Jordi Alba, who didn't have the best help in front of them either, in the form of Iniesta and Paulinho. This would create a lot of crossing opportunities for both CR7 and Benzema to feed on. And if you are a Real Madrid fan, and if you have been watching Real Madrid for the past few years under Zinedine Zidane, if you're a football fan, I kind of hope you have been, you'd know that a lot of the way they play is by trying to drown out the central areas, getting the ball wide and getting loads of crosses into the box for both CR7 and Benzema to head home at the back post. There was also variation in movement between Cristiano Ronaldo on the left and Marcelo, which made attacks less predictable, but also allowed CR7 to at times almost look like he was playing in his older role, which he played within the Jose Mourinho era, for example, where he'd aim to cut inside on his right foot from the left wing. Marcelo, again, if you watch a lot of Real Madrid, you'll know that he loves to basically add variation to his attack going forward. He's a key part of how Real Madrid play, and the runs that he makes down the left-hand side not only help make space for Cristiano Ronaldo, but sometimes Marcelo will cut inside, which allows Ronaldo to go on the outside. And just that variation makes it very, very difficult to defend against, especially in Roberto's case, where Paulinho wasn't really the best player to be helping him out defensively in front of him. Granted, though, Paulinho, I think, did a better job defensively than Iniesta did on the other side to protect Alba. Fortunately, though, for Barcelona, Real Madrid tend to attack more down the left-hand side, which is Cristiano Ronaldo's side. So, as expected, Real Madrid's wing-backs had freedom to both cut inside, which we often see Marcelo do more than Carvajal, or take the ball wide and cross the ball into the box. Depending on this movement, it's the responsibility of either Modric or Kroos to provide an overlap out wide. Sometimes you'd obviously potentially see movement from Ronaldo in that area, but like I've already emphasised, a lot of the time when that happens, it'll actually be Ronaldo who'll look to drift inside once it looks like a crossing opportunity is on. Modric will play the ball wide to Marcelo, Modric will make a run and the 1-2 is complete, and you want both Ronaldo and Benzema in the box. Carvajal will sneak to recycle possession in these areas here if required, if a ball comes across, and Kroos won't be too far behind as well in terms of getting bodies into the box. This would often result in a Barca wing-back sticking to the wing-back cutting inside when they do cut inside, and an area that had to be addressed. So an example of this, if we remove all of this jazz, so in the scenario where, for example, let's bring Ronaldo back here, Benzema here, Carvajal here, and obviously another thing actually, whilst I'm here, I'll mention, due to the narrowness that Barcelona were playing, obviously narrowness in terms of their width, so if Marcelo had the ball in this kind of scenario, there would be loads of room on the other side for Carvajal to basically play into. And this is why Real Madrid switch play a lot, and why they always keep a second winger out wide. So when there's a lot of space for Carvajal, it's not unusual in this kind of scenario where Marcelo's starting to get drowned out and the most of the narrow Barcelona defensive side is moving towards where the ball is. This is why they look to utilise these playmakers, right? And why both Modric, Kroos are so important for how Real Madrid play. Marcelo can play this ball back to Modric and then he can switch play to the opposite wing-back in space. It's basically why these wing-backs are not only so important in the narrow formations, or the 4-4-2 diamond that Zinedine Zidane likes to employ, but also in how Real Madrid play. So back to what I was basically trying to say. So in this kind of scenario here, where I'm basically trying to say the problem would be when the wing-back would cut inside, that his opposite wing-back would follow him, and that would leave space vacated for Real Madrid to run into. So in the scenario where Marcelo picks the ball up around here and opts to actually make a run inside, with Ronaldo obviously here, rather than on the outside, what that would tend to result into is this 1 versus 1 situation here. Modric then pulling wider, being ready to overlap himself, or sometimes that can be Ronaldo, for example. But what it causes is, in a scenario where Marcelo will cut inside, Roberto has to follow him, because he's now Roberto's man. And then that further on creates space for Real Madrid to exploit and for the central players to run into. And in theory, as long as Real Madrid, this is why Casemiro is so important to shield the defence, as long as they maintain that stability, it should be fine being able to throw these central players forward. But the reason why I point it out is because this was a threat for Barcelona and it was causing their fullbacks or wingbacks a lot of problems. When Marcelo especially would come in narrow and he'd get followed by Roberto. Now Roberto's not necessarily doing anything wrong in terms of following Marcelo, but you need good defensive awareness from Paulinho to know he has to maintain any runners that run from midfield and whatnot. And really it just basically caused Barcelona's defence to really struggle, as you'd imagine. But that's also why Real Madrid are as powerful as they are. They have players like Marcelo, like Ronaldo, like Benzema, who are incredibly versatile, who allow you to switch it up on the fly. And when your opposition is really unpredictable, it is very, very difficult to defend against them, especially when they obviously force you out of position like Marcelo's insider runs do. Around the 23rd minute, it became clear that Messi had been instructed to sit a lot deeper and change his role more from someone aiming to feed off Barcelona's direct balls forward, because that's all they really managed to do within the first 23-25 minutes due to the high pressure game centrally that Real Madrid were playing. And Barcelona, with how narrow they were set up in this 4-4-2, where they essentially were playing with 4 central midfielders, they made that easy for Real Madrid. Now, it makes a team like Barcelona difficult to break down, except in the wide areas, but because you're narrow, it normally means you can deal with the large number of crosses coming into the box, right? So Barcelona managed to deal with it in the end, but it was becoming clear that they were going to need more than to just hope to defend for 90 minutes and play long direct balls forwards towards Suarez and Messi. Real Madrid played quite a high line, but it was just obvious at 23 minutes in, given that this team are currently unbeaten in La Liga and look set to win La Liga, that something wasn't right and something had to change. So Messi got instructed to sit a little bit deeper and basically act more of a pivot in front of the 4 in midfield. This would help Barcelona regain possession better because they have an extra man in midfield that helps them deal with that press from Real Madrid in the middle of the park. But also, as a result of that, they've got more players in midfield now. It now meant that they could afford to concede more space because it's being covered now that they've added an extra man in. They could increase their width to match their opposition, which in return also helps them deal a little bit better with the wing-backs coming forward, because you're now sat a lot wider, which means you've got players closer to them that can close them down quicker, rather than, you know, be forced out of position and whatnot. Because up until this point, it was all Real Madrid. After the small tactical changes by Ernesto Valverde, Zizou also had to adapt as a result of Barcelona suddenly playing wider and the fact that it would not be realistic for Real Madrid to maintain the same level of pressure for as long as they had been doing, roughly around the 30-minute mark, and obviously Barcelona going wider made this a lot more difficult for them. You notice Madrid starting to sit back a little bit more. This was also partly down to the fact that Barcelona were now able to get into Madrid's half and commit men forward. They had an extra midfielder. Real Madrid were pressing off a little bit less due to the fact they were playing wider. There was more space for Barcelona to really, for their players to utilise, to stand into, to receive the ball into, to play passes towards. And Messi dropping deep, as we'll go on to see, really did in the long run help Barcelona. It only took roughly 5 minutes from the change for Barcelona to build up an attack and create Paulinho's one-on-one opportunity on goal. Now, if you didn't watch the game, you'll have no idea what I'm talking about, which is why my tactical analysis kind of assume that you watched the game. Messi, or you have the highlights somewhere, Messi drifting about deep, picks up the ball as Barcelona start to build an attack, and he threads from the right wing here. He was drifting deep, picked up the ball here. Real Madrid are obviously defending, and Paulinho makes the run in and around this area here and gets the better of Ramos. He manages to thread an astonishing ball over the top, and there was not really much Ramos could do but put Paulinho off a little bit. Paulinho was one-on-one with Navas, and if not for an unbelievable save from Navas, Barcelona, despite up until this point, 30 minutes into the first half, barely seeing much of the ball all game, could have taken the lead. But signs that Messi dropping deeper was proving he was much more than just a goal scorer, but also a world-class playmaker too. And obviously against weaker sides in the division, Barcelona may never have necessarily really felt that this was too necessary to do, or, you know, that they really found themselves kind of struggling the way that they did in the first 20, 30 so minutes at the Bernabeu. But it just goes to show how much of a great player Lionel Messi is, and how much of a good tactical decision it was, despite being simple, from Valverde to adjust. And that only 5 minutes into the adjustment, Barcelona actually managed to build an attack, finally move out of their own half and create a clear-cut opportunity. We saw a crucial instance as well of the defending both Benzema and Ronaldo contribute to around the 33rd minute. Barcelona, at this point, changes happened. Messi more closer towards the midfield, less pressure on Busquets, for example, so he can concentrate on doing what he wants to do rather than just get completely outnumbered in the middle of the park. And they're starting to, you know, build up and move into the Real Madrid half. Now, Benzema gets a lot of stick from Real Madrid fans, particularly given that he, especially this season, only has 2 La Liga goals this season. But the reason Zinedine Zidane loves him so much is because he's always willing to work hard for the team. Benzema comes deep into midfield in this case and helps Madrid win the ball back. The ball back. And the next time you are watching Real Madrid, honestly, just watch Benzema and Ronaldo and the sheer amount of tracking back and defensive work that they do. But because they're so good physically, when they do go missing up front because they're helping out defensively, they can still get forward again to rebuild an attack, and that's how good players these guys are. And sometimes Benzema's work and legwork, I think, is something that basically gets forgotten about and ignored, because he's really a striker, and strikers are only judged nowadays, I think, by a lot of people just on their goal scoring ability, when in reality he brings so much more to the Real Madrid side. Benzema comes in deep to the midfield and helps Real Madrid win the ball back. Knowing this is crucial for how Madrid play and instigate their counter-attacking football with and from, to abuse the wide areas with, where Marcelo and Carvajal make runs forward. His clean tackle and pass back to Modric allows Modric to then find the run of Ronaldo, who in this scenario had actually changed over towards the right-hand side. Now, even after Barcelona started playing wider, it was still clear that it was always going to be a struggle for the Barcelona wing-backs to deal with players like Ronaldo, obviously making runs forward into the wide areas. Well, Ronaldo got past Alba on the right-hand side. Unfortunately, though, Benzema, who also worked his way to get into the box, just couldn't turn it in. And to be fair, he had both, I think it was, I can't remember who it was exactly, but he had 2 Barcelona defenders on him. Benzema was roughly in this area when Ronaldo threaded the ball into the box. And again, this crossing game is something we've become accustomed to seeing from Real Madrid. But with 2 Barcelona players on Benzema, he gets tackled and the ball should have gone out for a corner really, but for some strange reason the referee gave a goal kick. I think overall it was just another good example of Madrid finding lots of room in the wide areas just behind Barca's wing-backs in the first half. If you go back and watch extended highlights, you'll see what I mean. This was only one of the many instances where it happened, but they just could not break the deadlock. Just before half-time, we saw both teams have headed opportunities on goal. A routine save from Navas from a Paulinho header, who found himself in the centre-forward position, and a Benzema header from a Marcelo cross that narrowly missed the target. It was worth noting that Marcelo's cross, it was Piqué who was actually dragged out wide trying to stop it. So, obviously, Roberto had kind of found himself out of position going forward. Marcelo found himself here, and Piqué came out to basically meet Marcelo. As a result, Busquets drops in to defend, and Benzema's ready and lurking to get in on the end of the cross. And I think it could have been Ronaldo who was around this area here and whatnot as the cross came in. And to be fair, it was more of a near post cross around here, and Benzema basically heads at goal, and he was really unlucky not to score. But what I want to focus on is the fact that Piqué found himself, who's a centre-back, found himself dragged out wide to meet Marcelo. Now, I know it was a devastating, typical Real Madrid counter-attack, but it just goes to show the disorganisation defensively that we did see at times in the wide areas from Barcelona. So even though Barcelona had made changes that allowed them to create more opportunities on goal themselves, and they were retaining more possession finally, and finally starting to get the ball forward, and Messi was being brought into play more, as a result of that they became more disorganised at the back, which is something unaffordable against Real Madrid. It's also worth noting as well that by this point, Paulinho was really starting to show glimpses of starting to play with more of a free role. Towards the first 20 minutes or so, he was pretty much playing in the same area of the park most of the time. It's also worth noting that Paulinho, by this point, was showing glimpses of starting to play with a very free role. A lot different to the more structured role he was playing within the first 20 minutes, over towards the right-hand side a lot more. So, for example, as Messi would drop deep, Paulinho would make vertical runs in the channels going forwards to try and help increasing with Barca's attacking intensity. And a lot of the time, he'd probably be the third most forward player behind Suarez and Messi. So just aiming to give them more options in the final third, really, trying to act as that kind of extra playmaker just behind the two danger men in Suarez and Messi, as well as try and get in the box. And that's really what helped him get on the end of the header that was saved by Navas towards the end of the first half. But overall, to summarise the first half, it was a Real Madrid dominant first half. How Real Madrid hadn't really found the back of the net. Well, they did a minute in from a corner, but it didn't count. Was kind of astonishing given the amount of opportunities Real Madrid had. But what was really sure was that Barcelona, even though we saw glimpses of changes starting to help, they were still struggling. So second half would be a very, very important team talk for Valverde. It became obvious that he had some ideas up his sleeve, but it's always not as easy to get them across when you're obviously on the touchline. And yeah, it would also be really, really interesting to see how Real Madrid come out into the second half and see whether or not they change much, or whether or not they look to kind of go pedal to the metal like they did at the start of the first half and play that high pressure game that they started off with, and whether Barcelona would actually allow that high pressure game to be effective, given that they started playing wider and so on, which did see Real Madrid kind of turn the tone down a little bit. Coming out into the second half, it was clear the changes we saw start to come to fruition in the first half were indeed discussed in more detail at half-time in the Barcelona dressing room. On the ball, Suarez played as a lone striker with both Messi and Paulinho really more aiming to make runs in behind him. Paulinho was playing a lot more narrow than we were kind of maybe used to seeing him do in the first half, and at times it would often kind of end up looking more like a bit more of a narrow 4-3-3. We saw maybe Rakitic move here. I mean, the reason why I say maybe is because, to be honest, when you talk about teams like Real Madrid and Barcelona, all you need to say about a certain player is roughly the area he was playing in. You don't need to basically say, oh, he was playing on the right-hand side or he's playing on the left-hand side, because these players are so versatile and have so much freedom throughout a game that it won't be unusual to see them swap from time to time. If one's gone forward and Iniesta needs to do some defensive work, you will see him end up going to that side whilst Rakitic gets back to cover this side if the ball's over here, if you get the gist of my drift. So I don't want to really emphasise whether one's on the left or one's on the right-hand side. But it started to look more like a narrow 4-3-3, whereas, of course, in this kind of scenario, it means that width-wise, you have to rely on these two, right? But obviously, at the same time, Paulinho still had the freedom to stretch out wide. Suarez had the freedom to stretch out wide to create room for Messi, maybe. And that's really, just in a nutshell, what you really get from Barcelona. You just have to embrace it, that they are capable of playing this fluid, versatile way of football. And the same applies to Real Madrid. Once getting the ball in the Madrid half, late runs made by both the Argentinian and Brazilian would often make it look like Barcelona had three narrow strikers. These runs would occupy spaces, a lot of the time between Real's fullback and centre-back, which would divert attention away from Roberto and Alba's runs forward. So Suarez really is a danger man in and around here, moving into the channels and whatnot. And then when Barcelona looked like they're starting to mount an attack, Paulinho would look to exploit this space here. Messi would look to exploit this space here. And again, these players have a lot of freedom, so they'd swap around. Sometimes you'd get a player running through there, and as we saw, Suarez, a lot of the time, Suarez is that kind of player that likes to make the running behind his centre-back between the full-back, right? So you will get that kind of variation in play, but basically looking to abuse these areas here, and these areas really partly existed because Marcelo and Carvajal look to get forward so much, and there's only so much Casemiro as well can do. Yeah, so basically Alba and Roberto would come forward, and basically when Paulinho and Messi make these runs, they would occupy Carvajal and Marcelo, and they'd kind of be in two places at once, and as a result, more room was created to allow both Alba and Roberto to find more room out in the wide positions and be more effective going forward. What was most astonishing, though, was how Real Madrid, coming into this second half, opted to no longer continue the same high-pressing game they began the first half with. Now, we kind of discussed why that might necessarily be a good idea, but when I say they were no longer pressing, I mean they were sat back. So, obviously, when Barcelona went wider in the first half, they were still pressing. They were still trying to win the ball back, but it just wasn't as intense. I mean, the level of intensity I saw pressing-wise from Real Madrid in the first 10 minutes was like close to the level of total football in 1974. Now, that's a bit of an over-exaggeration, but I mean, I watch a lot of Real Madrid, and I don't think I've seen them press with that kind of intensity recently, under Zidane's management especially, for a very, very long time, right? Even though they do obviously like to press, and they toned it down. But in the second half, they toned it down completely. It almost looked like they'd come out of the second half with cool heads, not even wanting to play football, forgetting that El Clasico was on, really, and that they were taking part in it. The players had time to rest at half-time. They still had 3 substitutions to go, and even with Messi dropping deeper, it was clearly effective in the first half to play that high-pressing game that they were playing, or at least some pressing, please, Real Madrid, but we didn't see any of it. Partly also because Barcelona aren't used to playing against it too. You know, week in, week out against La Liga. They don't play against teams that press, or have players to press with that kind of high level of intensity. And that worked in Real Madrid's favour in the first half. Instead, they were just standing off and really just letting Barcelona go about playing low-tempo, two-touch football. Fatigue is normally an issue in these scenarios, but I doubt it was the case here. It genuinely looked as if they were instructed to specifically no longer close down with too much aggression, let alone the complete contrast that we saw in the first half. So even though on the ball, it looked more like a narrow 4-3-3-ish type of thing coming out from Barcelona with a lot of freedom, off the ball, you then kind of start to see the narrowness return in terms of defending, and kind of a flashback to what we were really, seeing in the first half, where Paulinho would no longer be playing within this final third. He'd drop back out wide to help Roberto out, and Rakitic would do the exact same to Alba. And sometimes instead of Rakitic, it would be Iniesta and so on. Like I said, these players are very versatile, and it was changing fairly often. But in this case, it doesn't really matter specifically who the player is. Busquets was obviously maybe at times sat a little bit deeper than the rest of the two, and Messi really aiming to be this link player. So when I put Messi here, it means you get movement from Messi and whatnot as required. So he wouldn't just stay central; he'd run the flanks as well, or run the channels. And yeah, that was also what made Barcelona quite difficult to break down. We saw the two banks of 4 be very difficult for Real Madrid to break down, and they maintained that off the ball. And because these are such good players, when they'd win the ball back, it wasn't really too much of a difficult job for them to transition back into that kind of more of a narrow 4-3-3 that they attacked with. And obviously at times it can go wider and you can get these two involved and whatnot. So as we discussed, off the ball, Barcelona would return to more of a 4-4-1-1, Messi playing just off Suarez to aid the midfield and act as a link between the midfield and attack, while Paulinho would be more disciplined and drop wide to the right wing and look to try and protect Roberto. However, due to how fluidly and quickly Barcelona are able to change shape when the ball is regained, this would force Real Madrid's wing-backs to basically have to be more disciplined going forward and try and balance their activities. Because, as we already discussed, that space between the centre-back and the wing-back, as well as Roberto and Alba kind of overlapping, was really causing Marcelo and Carvajal problems. And if it wasn't causing Marcelo and Carvajal problems, it was going to start causing them problems. And, really, the Real Madrid wing-backs looking to be disciplined going forward and balance their activities isn't necessarily something they find themselves doing very often. Real Madrid, to kind of try and counter the fact that Messi was really the instrumental man in basically creating that connection between the front players and the midfield, we saw instances where Kovacic was man-marking him very tightly. This would let Casemiro do his ball winning due to his qualities in that area, kind of leave Casemiro to do his own thing, and that you probably want both Modric and Kroos to carry on doing their own thing. So Kovacic in this case was the chosen one or the sacrificed one. And the reason why I first mentioned Casemiro is because some people would think, oh, well, Casemiro, he's the best player defensively out of all of them. But due to that being the case, you don't want to, get rid of his qualities by just basically asserting him only on Lionel Messi, right? So, yeah, but either way, you don't need me to tell you that the adjustment on Kovacic wasn't exactly ideal. I mean, it was a great idea, and it's certainly did apply pressure onto Messi, regardless of the fact that this is Messi we're talking about, but I can think of a lot of other players in world football I would rather assign that role to than Kovacic. Just a shame they couldn't sub on Xabi Alonso or Sami Khedira as a more robust defensive midfield option, because it was coming clear from Kovacic's body language as well that he was struggling. So 52 minutes in, we start to see some of these changes come into play. Iniesta plays a through ball to Alba down the left wing. Now Alba was being watched carefully by Carvajal, which again allowed Suarez to find this space in between the fullback and the centre-back, which is what Barcelona wanted to do. And when you're Varane up against a player like Suarez in this kind of scenario, it's very difficult because you've got to move back with your defensive line as well. So Iniesta through ball towards Alba. Alba outpaces Carvajal. And as the Real Madrid kind of back four move in, Paulinho moves in. Messi makes a run in from deep. This is one of the advantages, actually, when you play Messi in that slightly deeper role, is that sometimes using his pace, he can make them late runs in. And, you know, defensively, you can't really keep up with him and keep track of him. So these two really make a run into the box. Alba eventually plays it across to Suarez, who's roughly around this area. He shoots, and it's a save from Navas. But straight away, we start to see a side of Barcelona that we never really saw in the first half. And we start to see them little intricacies that I mentioned and noticed really, in my opinion, come into play. And if you go back and watch it, 52 minutes in, you can see how narrow these front three are. And suddenly Barcelona not only getting the ball wide and starting to get the ball into the box and starting to create opportunities on goal, but they're getting players in the box and the ball out of their own half, which is a bloody godsend in comparison to what we were seeing, which was very unlike Barcelona within the first half. 1 minute later, Barcelona break the deadlock. Remember me saying that Madrid would have to be disciplined against Barca's changes, and that both wing-backs would have to stop going walkies? Well, Casemiro also went walkies. With the Brazilian going missing from his role, parrying in front of both Ramos and Varane, it left Barcelona in a 5 versus 4 situation on the counter-attack. The most frustrating thing about the goal, though, for Real Madrid fans is the fact that Rakitic ran half the length of the pitch, running past both Modric and Kovacic. So this goal began in Barcelona's own half, when Real Madrid lost the ball in Barcelona's half on the attack. Modric let Rakitic run past him in the Real Madrid half, without a care in the world, almost like he was expecting Kovacic ahead of him to close his fellow Croatian comrade down. Kovacic, too, let Rakitic run past him, opting to stay closer to Messi and track Messi behind him, but also expecting Modric to do something about his fellow Croatian comrade. Again, this move had a lot of Croatians involved. Marcelo should have been following Sergi Roberto, who had pushed all the way up. So you got to bear in mind that Real Madrid are in the kind of scenario where they're trying to run back here, and Roberto was making a run here, and Paulinho was actually hovering in this area here. So you can see that variation, very similar to what we discussed Real Madrid do from time to time. That's what you get with these top teams. So let's try and recreate this, actually, since we're here. So we've got Kovacic here. Rakitic is basically making a run forward. Casemiro is lost somewhere here. These are all the way over here. Rakitic runs past one, runs past another. Kovacic is really trying to stay tight to Messi, who's playing in this deeper role. And essentially, well, Marcelo, for some reason, decides, you know what, I see Roberto making this run. I'm not going to get tight with him. I'm just going to chill here and just jog for a bit and stay closer to Messi, because for some reason Messi's more of a danger in this area here. Rakitic has just casually made it past. It was more towards that way, to be honest, given the camera angle I watched. But let's just imagine they were shooting towards the other end. Rakitic ends up in this scenario here. You've got to feel sorry, in my opinion, for both Ramos and Varane, who have just let Rakitic basically run through all of Real Madrid's half. And essentially, it left Rakitic with only Varane and Ramos to beat. With Roberto on the overlap, Marcelo not picking him up, because apparently you need two players on Messi, who's not even anywhere near the box. Rakitic plays an intelligent pass out wide to Roberto, who basically, there you go, plays a ball across goal to Suarez, who's roughly in this situation here. And before you know it, it's 1-0. And it left Suarez with only one option. And he hit the bullseye, put the Catalans 1-0 up. So even though analysts on TV and commentators were emphasising for some strange reason, oh, Casemiro's gone missing. Oh, no, why is Casemiro all the way up here? Oh, this is all Casemiro's fault. Let's blame Casemiro and whatnot. I mean, Casemiro, even in the first half, was pressuring high up the pitch sometimes. And he has this kind of, obviously, he's normally known for being that kind of parry player in front of the back four. But it doesn't mean he doesn't have a licence to also go forward. And bear in mind the fact that Real Madrid were caught out on the counter-attack. Now, obviously, he is the more defensive of the midfield trio that Real Madrid play in midfield, or the diamond, or whatever you want to call it. But given the fact that Kovacic, Marcelo and Modric were also behind Casemiro, why are you not asking why no one even bothered trying to tackle Rakitic? And this is why I was emphasising that Real Madrid went from playing this high-pressure game in the first half, where they looked like they were heading into war rather than play football, and suddenly decided, you know what, we're not in the mood for this second half. And that is genuinely what happened. And I hate to sound somewhat, sarcastic and whatnot, but when you watch El Clasico, you expect a certain standard of football. And Real Madrid, for this first goal in particular, defensively did not provide that. And it was like, I watch League One football week in, week out, or Championship football, depending on whether the team I support are relegated or promoted, right? And I've seen better defending, more hunger to win the ball back in midfields than I did for that goal. And it was far, far, far too easy for Barcelona. Modric, Kovacic, Marcelo left themselves in the dressing room at half-time. And yes, Barcelona did well to create the counter-attack, but the goal was a result of Real Madrid's careless, cocky attitude. They'd been dominant in the first half, but clearly it meant nothing with the score still at 0-0. No defensive care from the European champions, and ultimately you have to feel sorry for Ramos, Varane and Navas, who all of a sudden, less than 10 minutes into the first half, are the only Los Blancos players who actually bothered to even try and defend. Overall, a goal that could have easily been prevented, but it wasn't, and therefore a goal that Madrid deserved to concede. It was clear that Barcelona's tactical shift was making a difference, and that Madrid needed some kind of spark off the bench to change it around. With Madrid's pressing in central areas being disposed of early in the first half, and with Messi essentially playing passes out into the wide channels being vacated by Marcelo and Carvajal for fun, Madrid needed some discipline to keep themselves in the game with just over an hour to go. Half an hour to go, sorry. But now that they were chasing a goal, it was going to be hard to try and find it, because you're now chasing a goal, you're at home, you need to win. Obviously, Marcelo and Carvajal are going to start getting forward even more. They would have been healthy in that 0-0 scenario. They can be more conservative about it, kind of let the game drag on, and then slowly start to throw yourself a little bit more forward when you really, really, really need that goal. And if you lose 1-0 in like the 80th minute or 75th minute, then you can think, well, it made sense that Real Madrid really needed to go for this and get the 3 points, and they did, and they got hit on the counter-attack. So 10 minutes after the first goal, both Modric and Kovacic watch and jockey backwards as Messi begins aim to the run of Suarez out on the left. Carvajal, instead of sticking with the run of Suarez out on the left, opted to carry on having a walk around the Santiago Bernabeu instead. Suarez in on goal should have finished, but you can argue that opened the opportunity for Barcelona to create havoc in the box. And as we know, that resulted in Messi's penalty and got Carvajal sent off for a deliberate handball on the line. And as soon as that second goal goes in, which was the penalty, it's game, set and matched with around just under 30 minutes of the game to go. And 2-0 down against Barcelona, it's always going to be an uphill struggle. And you go and watch how that second penalty came to become a thing, and regardless of the fact that Real Madrid were now down to 10 men, defensively, absolutely all over the place. And I call these tactical analysis and whatnot, but they're kind of turning into a rant about ridiculously poor defending now. Now, I can't show you the highlights, I can't show you the goals because of copyright. But assuming you've watched it, I don't think you need me to rant any more further about how poor the defending was. Like I said, why was Carvajal not sticking to the run of Suarez out on the left? Carvajal obviously right back. And to be fair, the fact that Carvajal didn't stick with the run of Suarez, if you ask me, he probably deserved to get sent off. Because Suarez should have really scored when it was one-on-one, irregardless of how the penalty came about. And, I think I'll leave it at that. I think another thing, though, just before I do leave it at that helped was Piqué's run going forward. If you do go back and watch the goal, just look at how Piqué carried the ball out of Barcelona's own half and instigated the attack. This is a centre-back we're talking about. Regardless of the fact that it was far too easy for him to counter-attack Real Madrid and just casually stroll into Real Madrid's half, look at how his run forward confused Ramos and Varane in particular. It made Varane move away from Suarez's run. And Varane, to be fair to him, kind of expected Carvajal to deal with Suarez's run as you'd naturally do when you rewatch it. So, in an indirect, strange way, Piqué's run also helped create the goal. But really, it just felt like Real Madrid came out into the second half and just couldn't really be bothered defending properly against one of the world's best attacks. So come the 71st minute, after Barca clearly were wasting time, passing the ball sideways, teasing the tired Madrid front line in front of their own fans to delay Zidane's substitutions, Asensio eventually came on for Casemiro, and Kovacic came off for Gareth Bale. This forced a change for 10-men Madrid to 4-2-3. Prior to these two substitutions, though, Zidane was booed for bringing on Nacho to play right back when a more attacking player, given the scoreline, despite being down to 10 men, wouldn't have been an illogical forward-thinking choice either. So, you know, a lot of pundits were kind of saying, so probably a lot of fans were kind of assuming, well, okay, we need a goal, we've got 20 or so minutes, instead of bringing Nacho on, could have brought Gareth Bale into the game a lot earlier. Heck, go for, I don't know, Lucas Vazquez and play both Ronaldo and Bale through the middle, get direct balls forwards and have Vazquez, for example, out on the right, or Vazquez out on the left and Asensio out on the right. But obviously that isn't what Zizou opted to do, and it did frustrate some of the Bernabeu crowd. And what really added insult to injury was the fact that when Bale and Asensio were ready to come on, basically Barcelona were just wasting time passing the ball sideways. So even though the players were probably ready like 6-7 minutes before they actually came on, that was a lot of time wasted just because the ball wasn't going out of play. And Real Madrid, especially being down to 10 men, couldn't really anymore risk playing a high pressure game and leaving space behind them to give Barcelona a third goal or to try and win that ball back. But eventually in the 71st minute, Bale and Asensio did finally make their way onto the pitch. In terms of what actually happened when they switched to the 4-2-3-1, Asensio was really drifting both central and wide, really kind of directly based on Marcelo's movement out on the left wing. And the aim really was try and get balls into the box where CR7 would be waiting and Bale would be coming in at the back post, because obviously they're two very big players and decent in the air. And this almost worked, to be fair, when Modric drilled the ball across goal and Bale from this area here really should have scored. But it was a fantastic save from ter Stegen to prevent it. But with just under 20 minutes or so to go at that point, a goal there would have been massive for Real Madrid. And, you know, maybe could have been what they really needed to get the crowd behind them at home in such an important game like this. But in general, Barcelona were keeping the ball well, using their extra man advantage well. And the energised Semedo came on for Iniesta, which then actually meant that Semedo... let's just pretend that he's Semedo for a second. I don't know off the top of my head what number Semedo is. Semedo then came on at right back, which then actually allowed Sergi Roberto to move into midfield. And obviously Roberto has pretty decent defensive capabilities, and obviously with Iniesta getting older, Roberto provided even more legs in midfield, with Semedo dropping in at right back, and it really at one point looked a lost cause for Zidane's side, especially after Bale's kind of miss. Madrid kept with the same game plan, wanting to get the ball wide to the likes of Bale, Asensio and Marcelo, but the lack of a second person in the box at times alongside CR7 meant it was often wasteful. So there were times where Bale would get the ball out wide, and then when it came to really crossing in, Modric and Kroos were nowhere to be found. Asensio is not really the ideal person you want to cross into, and I think Sergio Ramos as captain was getting frustrated because even he started bombing forward for the sake of trying to get another secondary option in the box for Real Madrid with. And it just makes you wonder why so many players went missing when the ball was actually in the final third. It was almost like at times, especially these two, just did not want to get into the box, as much as I hate to say it. And ter Stegen still made a very good save on a Ramos chance that really should have hit the back of the net. Then last but not least, that man again, Lionel Messi, once again ended up proving he's much more than a goal scorer. He managed to keep the ball in out wide, and this was the third goal that really killed things off. He kind of danced a bit with Messi. Marcelo fell on his ass, which to me really sums up Real Madrid's defensive display in the second half. Messi then, without even looking up, plays the ball to the edge of the box, and it was Vidal who was subbed on for Alba, who basically fired home and made it 3-0. So, not really too much of a special goal, but again, defensively, a little bit all over the place from Real Madrid, and it just rounded things off with the third of the afternoon. So, conclusively, there was probably much more we could have spoken about. After all, it was El Clasico, for God's sake. But that aside, I've tried to cover what I consider were the key points in terms of analysing what went right and what went wrong in the game, as well as how they came to fruition, and I apologise if it felt like some of it was ranting, but as someone who cares for football, as someone who gets excited about games like this, even though I'm sure Barcelona fans are enjoying it, for me, as someone who has a soft spot for Real Madrid, and I'll admit that because I'm not being paid to do this, right? You know, I don't have to be neutral. I think Vidal really holding the L shape with his fingers after that third goal wasn't necessarily wrong, because Real Madrid in that second half, that wasn't like watching Real Madrid. It looked like a completely different team who... It would look more like a bunch of 11 tourists at the Santiago Bernabéu you'd stuck on the pitch, really, defensively. And Zinedine Zidane is a Real Madrid legend. What he's accomplished as manager of the Whites has been unbelievable. Despite some fans calling for his head, which I still think is ridiculous, it's clear this season that against bigger sides, they've conceded goals as a result of poor defending and positioning down the flanks, / balls into the box from out wide, alongside being caught out on the counter-attack a little bit too much. Barca today, Spurs in the Champions League, Valencia in La Liga, Dortmund in the Champions League, and you can probably name more, right? And those games that I mentioned, just go back and watch the goals that Real Madrid conceded. Using the wing-backs for width going forward, getting balls into Ronaldo and Benzema in the box is what Madrid have become known for under Zidane. And we actually discussed this in more detail in my Understanding Zidane tactical video that you can find on my channel. And obviously this approach results in space being left out wide when the wing-backs bomb forward. But this season, it's starting to hurt them a little bit more. Particularly now, they can't make up for it at the other end, which in my opinion is Real Madrid's real problem this season. And even though at this point in La Liga, they've played 16, conceded 14, which is the exact same amount they had at this time last season in La Liga when they were at the top of the league, context is key. You can't compare Barcelona and the big boys in Europe to the rest of La Liga, with all due respect. At this point last season, Madrid had 9 more points overall, but most importantly 15 goals more scored, despite having played 16 and conceded 14 then as well. And no games lost, of course, in comparison to 3 games lost so far this season. And come the end of La Liga last season, they basically won La Liga with only 3 games lost. So it really goes to show how much of a contrast there is between Madrid in La Liga this season versus last season. It's 2 days from Christmas, and Ronaldo, Isco and Asensio are Madrid's top goal scorers, with only 4 goals apiece in the league, while Messi alone has scored 15, supplemented by Luis Suarez's 10. Morata had 5 league goals at this point last season, despite his limited game time. Ronaldo had 10, Benzema still had 4. I get that Asensio is a replacement for Rodriguez, but looking at the bench today, Madrid needed someone in the box to help Ronaldo, especially when you're chasing a goal. A natural goal scorer with pace up front could have been useful up against Barcelona's high line, especially in the first half when defensively they did look a bit of a mess. A different option perhaps? Is that someone Aubameyang? Was that someone Gareth Bale off the bench? Morata ended La Liga last season with 15 goals, 5 assists in 1,331 minutes of game time. Benzema ended La Liga last season with 11 goals, 5 assists and 1,913 minutes of game time. That's 600 minutes more. I love Benzema, I think he's a fantastic player and totally understand why Zidane does too. And I completely disagree with the Real Madrid fans that think he's past it. I think he plays a very, very important role with how Real Madrid want to play football. However, now that Ronaldo's goals have dried up this season, because that kind of used to make up for the dirty work that Benzema used to do, because Ronaldo was really more the main goal scorer. But Ronaldo's Ronaldo. He's Ronaldo. He's never going to get stick. You get where I'm coming from? The blame will go on Benzema because, oh, he's the striker and he's the one that should be scoring goals, when in reality, Ronaldo's always scored more goals than Benzema. Ronaldo's always been the main source of goal for Real Madrid. And now that Ronaldo's goals have dried up this season, and the effect of carrying the side on his back is starting to possibly take its toll, who exactly is going to replace Morata's goals this season? At this time last season, Real Madrid had scored 15 more goals than they have done right now. Were those 15 goals Morata's? Well, no, because Morata obviously scored 15 goals all season, but if only half of them, for example, were Morata's, that's still 7-8 goals more than they've scored so far this season, and that's a lot of goals that can make a lot of difference to certain results in La Liga. So far, nobody by the looks of things is going to replace them Morata goals. And given the way Madrid play their football, they're either going to have to find someone to get on the end of the barrage of crosses coming in from out wide, or either come up with a plan B. Because under Zidane, Madrid have always focused on getting their wing-backs forwards and crossing the ball into the box. But at the end of the day, that's not my job. It's Zizou's. As well as to make sure his players, fullbacks and midfielders included, learn that they are actually expected to defend, track runners and at least get the basics right, which Madrid didn't do today in the second half. It was two contrasting Real Madrid sides. The one in the first half had you basically considering, wow, if they keep playing like this, I mean, where's this come from? They could win a third Champions League to, well, they'd have probably lost against Blackburn Rovers playing in League One. You know, and I'm a Blackburn fan, so I have the right to take the piss out of them. But that's how bad Real Madrid were defensively in the second half. And trust me, I watch League One Championship football, I know what bad defending is. I know the core of this team has won the Champions League twice in a row now, but sometimes in football you need competition for places. Sometimes players get too comfortable. Remember what happened to Mourinho's Chelsea when they won the Premier League and came crashing down? As for Barcelona, who needs Neymar when you've got Paulinho, who I thought was a bit iffy in the first 20 minutes, but after that was phenomenal, I think. He was all over the pitch. Whether it was helping out defensively or going forward, he looked like a changed player, especially in the second half. Even though I admit that Real Madrid probably made that a little bit easier for him. And Messi also proved that he's not just a goal scorer. That he really is the complete player. I mean, probably not the complete player because I wouldn't want to really play Messi at centre-half, but you get where I'm coming from. Some of the passes that Messi was making, and he totally deserved his assist for the third goal, by the way, was just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant and a joy to behold. But I think what we all can conclude is not only that Real Madrid need to really take a long, hard look at themselves, but also consider how awkward it must be to be a Spurs fan and see how well Paulinho played in such an important game and wonder why on earth he couldn't ever do that for them. But that is going to be it for this video. I think it could end up being the longest one yet. I mean, every time I go into these saying I want to make them short, but that doesn't quite materialise. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you think I've missed anything out or you want to discuss something, do let me know in the comments below. Always open to criticism as long as it's constructive and all that jazz. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. You wanted El Clasico. You got El Clasico. Thanks for watching.